who really carries the weight of Europe? When you look past the headlines and all the political noise, who is actually funding the continent's massive social systems? In this explainer, we're going to dive deep into a report that investigates the incredible load, both financial and moral, that's being shouldered by Europe's working core, and what that means for all of our futures. The whole analysis kicks off with this really powerful idea. It frames the entire issue not just as, an economic problem, but as a deeply human story. It's about the people whose daily effort really underpins everything else. It's a reminder that behind every single statistic is a person getting up before dawn to make things happen. So, who are these people? Well, this first section really identifies the hero of our story, the millions of professionals, entrepreneurs, skilled workers, and all the private sector employees who form what this report calls Europe's forgotten backbone. And here it is, the central imbalance laid bare. The report finds that pretty much everywhere you look in Europe, the pattern is identical. The entire structure of the welfare state now rests on a shrinking minority of people. A single productive worker is often supporting 3, even 4 other citizens. This number just brings it all home, doesn't it? This is the average across the entire European Union. For every one person working in the private sector, generating more in taxes than they consume, they're supporting, on average, 3.4 other people. Just let that sink in for a second. That is a staggering weight to carry on your shoulders. So, you have to ask, how did things get so lopsided? A huge part of the answer is right here. Think about it. Labor, your job, my job, is geographically bound. We're stuck in one place, so it's easy to tax, often at really high rates of 40 to 45%. But capital? That's a different story. It's mobile. It can flow across borders in a millisecond to find the lowest tax rates, often paying an effective rate of less than 10%. This creates a massive structural imbalance in who foots the bill. But look, this didn't just happen overnight. It's the result of what the report calls the Great Fiscal Shift, a slow, steady transformation of Europe's economy that's been happening for decades. It's how we got here. This timeline really tells the whole story. After World War II, Europe built these amazing welfare states on a simple social contract. Work gave you dignity and security. But then, starting in the 90s, globalization changed the game. Capital was unleashed. And that kicked off this frantic race to the bottom, with countries slashing corporate taxes to attract investment. The end result today? The burden has shifted almost completely onto the shoulders of labor. I mean, look at these numbers. As corporate tax rates across the EU plummeted from an average of 35% all the way down to 20%, governments had a massive hole to fill in their budgets. So where did they get the money? They raised payroll and consumption taxes. Taxes that fall directly on the workers and consumers. The very same people we've been talking about. And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? When you fundamentally rearrange the foundations of your entire tax system, who ultimately ends up paying the price? This brings us to the real heart of the analysis. It's about defining a new kind of social geometry in Europe. It's not based on the old ideas of class, but on a simple question: what is your financial relationship to the state? The report basically outlines 3 distinct groups. First up, you have the mobile capital elite, who can legally and very effectively optimize their taxes across the globe. Then you have the collective class, which includes everyone from public sector employees to people receiving social benefits. And then there's the third group, the productive core, the private sector workers whose taxes are what actually fund the whole system. And this is where the data makes it incredibly real. Just look at these ratios for Europe's biggest economies. In Germany, every private sector worker is supporting 3.1 other people. In France, it's 3.6. And by the time you get down to Spain and Italy, that ratio is pushing 1 to 4. This fiscal burden, it isn't just some abstract idea. It's a measurable, heavy reality. So what happens when this pressure just becomes too much? The report argues that the system is getting dangerously close to a breaking point, and the warning signs are popping up all over the continent. This phrase is absolutely chilling. Effort becomes a liability. When you have a system that heavily taxes hard work and creation, but lightly taxes passive wealth, well, putting in the extra effort can actually start to feel like a financial mistake. And the social consequence of that is the hollowing out of the middle. The productive core, the backbone, finds itself squeezed. It's squeezed from above by a lightly taxed elite, and from below by the ever-growing needs of a state they are almost single-handedly funding. And this leads to the final and maybe most dangerous consequence. When the system becomes too punishing, the most creative, most productive, and most mobile people and businesses, they start to look for the exit. And this isn't some hypothetical threat. It's already happening. According to the data, over 1.5 million high-skilled workers have moved their tax base outside of the EU in just the last 10 years. That is a massive drain of talent, of innovation, and of tax revenue. The impact is real, and it's measurable. You see it in key economies like the Netherlands and France losing billions every single year. You see it in Germany, where the number of self-employed people has actually shrunk. And you see it in the small and medium-sized businesses, the real lifeblood of the economy, that are increasingly packing up and moving. The report is clear on this. This is a failure of policy, not a failure of patriotism. Okay, so after painting a pretty stark picture of the problem, the report pivots to focus on solutions. It asks the really important question: how do we build a Europe that is truly worth caring for everyone? So it proposes a 5-step path to try and restore some fairness. It starts with rebalancing the tax system away from labor. It calls for actually implementing that 15% global minimum tax, for taxing real capital gains, and for promoting entrepreneurship to grow the productive base. And finally, and this is crucial, reframing what we mean by solidarity, moving from simple dependence to a system of shared mutual responsibility. So the key takeaway is this: a sustainable Europe has to be defined by a renewed social contract, a place where hard work is actually honored, where contribution is rewarded, and where all forms of power, whether it's corporate or financial, bear their fair share of the weight. Ultimately, the message is a powerful call for shared responsibility. The weight has just become too heavy for one group to carry all on its own. For the continent to truly thrive, the burden has to be shouldered together. And the explainer ends with his powerful, unforgettable line. It's both a tribute to the millions of people whose quiet endurance is the bedrock of European society, and it's a stark warning. The future depends on us recognizing their contribution and restoring their faith that the system is fair. Because the final lingering question is, what happens if those who carry the weight simply decide to set it down?